Yo guys, what is going on? It is Invin here, and today what I am bringing to you guys is my best Bruiser build for Mutations. And what I'm going to be talking about today is the setup, of course what attributes you want to be running, as well as some helpful perks, and of course mainly and primarily I'm going to be talking about the weapons and the abilities and passives that you should be using on those weapons to best get results with inside Mutations, because some of these may differ from your PvP builds or your usual builds, whichever you use for PvE, such as Elite Zones, because Mutations provide that extra level of difficulty. So this should hopefully help you maximize your time and your potential inside of these Mutations with, as we know, very limited keys. Now before we jump into the video today, we are pushing for 15,000 subscribers, so if you haven't already done so, please do go down below and drop a subscribe to the channel. Today is my 1-year anniversary of uploading every single day to YouTube, so if you do want to be part of the YouTube family here, that would be absolutely amazing. We'd love to have you, so make sure you are joining down below with the subscribe button. And without further ado, let's jump into this one. So the first thing I want to touch on here then is actually my setup and what stats you should prioritize. So I split my Bruiser build into strength and constitution only. Some people like to split it different ways, but for me, both of the weapons I'm going to be using today are going to be the Great Axe and the Warhammer, and these scale exclusively from strength, so it just makes sense for me to scale exclusively from that, and of course then with constitution to keep you alive. Now, I use 2 void bent pieces at the moment. If you have stuff that you would prefer to use, I would go for constitution on those, and then on the other pieces it is either straight strength or straight constitution. You can go for, again, a split stat piece as well, depending upon what you get that is actually good for you in terms of perks, and that is what we're going to move on to next, which is actually going to be your ability perks. Now, obviously things like resilient don't work in PvE environments, which is why I said if you have something better than void bent, it's probably a good suggestion to use that here, because although this is really good with the invigorated, and obviously the constitution, its ratings of armor are great as well, but there is resilient on there, and obviously luck, which isn't that great for Mutations as well. It's up to you what you use, but for now, that's what I'm rocking. Then on the gloves, I've got a freedom perk on, which gets rid of slow, stun, silence, 7.5% faster. As well as this, I've got the insatiable gravity well, so that gives me 50% of my damage back as health on a successful attack, and cast another burst around you on a successful hit that deals 125% weapon damage, which is really good, adds a little bit more DPS, and also gives you some sustain, which is perfect. Then on the legs here, I've got Enfeebling Maelstrom and Invigorated. Again, Invigorated giving me Weaken, Disease, Exhaust, and Rend, 7.5% faster expiry. And then on Enfeebling Maelstrom, which is targets hit by Maelstroms, no reprieve, are weakened, reducing their attack damage by 14% for 4 seconds. So bear in mind, if you're not going to use Maelstrom or you're not going to use Gravity Well, you don't want to take these perks, but take a respective one to the ability that you're actually going to be using. And then on the boots here, finally, we've got Leeching, Path of Destiny, and Refreshing. Of course, Refreshing is super good, and to be honest, if I was going to recommend something to replace the void bent pieces, if you can get Invigorated, if you can get Freedom, or you can get Refreshing, those would be my recommendations, because those perks are really useful in these Mutations. Now, of course, Leeching Path of Destiny gives us health back, 28% of the damage dealt from Path of Destiny, and this actually stacks up with some passives that you get from the Hammer Tree as well, which is really cool, so I'll talk you guys through that as we get into there. Now, talking about jewelry quickly as well, I've got the Infinity Crystal on. Again, a lot of you will probably have a better piece by now, but Divine Fortified Health, all really useful. Then we move on to the ring. I've got a Leeching and a Keen Awareness, so it gives me extra critical, and 5% of my damage comes back to me as health. This doesn't trigger off persistent damage or from dot or damage over time effects, but this is really good with the Bruiser build, as most of it is straight out physical attacks, which does mean you're going to heal for roughly 5% of your damage. Again, increasing massively your sustain, paired with a lot of the passives and perks from both the Warhammer and the Great Axe skill trees. And finally, the earring that I'm using here is regenerating, which is gaining 0.48% of your health every second, and Purifying Toast, which is when you drink a regeneration potion, you lose a debuff. So again, really good in these Mutations. As you know, you can probably stack up these debuffs pretty quickly, so having that on is super useful. And of course, regenerating, just keeping you again with that sustain. Again, with these Constitution, and Strength, try to get those same perks. You can either be split between the two or one or the other. You don't want to get anything that has a different stat on, because it's just going to be wasted points with this build. Now, of course, with the hammer that I'm using here, I've got Sundering Shockwave, again applying a rend with the Shockwave for 9.5%, reducing damage absorption. Also got Keenly Fortified, which is really good. It means, again, a 10% fortify for 3 seconds on a critical hit. This, again, helps really good when you are in that melee position in these mutations, helps to keep you alive and can be crucial for getting that extra survivability. And then Enchanted on the bottom here, not an ideal perk for mutations, as really you're not going to be doing all that many light and heavy attacks. It is going to be more abilities with the hammer, unless of course it's Lazarus, where crush damage does additional ones. At the time of recording this video, we are on a Lazarus rotation, so this is actually a really good hammer for this point. Doesn't, however, have Ancient Bane on, so you could swap that out, but something with Sundering Shockwave is definitely recommended. And then the Great Axe that I'm using here is Keen one, so plus 11% crit chance, always great. And Plagued Crits, which is critical strikes against targets below 50% health, inflict disease, reducing their healing effectiveness by 24%. This isn't great for PvE, so I have also got another couple of options where I've got things like Keen Ancient Bane, Keen Angry Earth Bane, etc. Depending upon the rotation, I will swap out to those. This is really a better PvP axe, but just to give you guys a rough idea, you want Keen and then probably the Bane of the enemies that you are against with the Great Axe, or you could go for something like Keen and Enchanted so that you get extra crit and extra damage across the board. It's entirely up to you what you can get your hands on, of course, but those are my recommendations there. Now, in terms of gems on the armor, I go for Onyx, I go for Diamond, and you can see here I had an Abyssal Ward from last week's rotation, so you can change that as you will, but the Onyxes obviously give us physical damage reduction, or absorption rather, and then on the diamonds we get physical and elemental damage absorption, so it spreads out that both of those capacities and just gives you a little bit more sturdiness. That is the same then on the jewelry, and on the weapons I go for, of course, a diamond on the hammer there, which is rally plus 15% damage, outgoing at full HP. And then on the Great Axe, like I said, this is actually a tune for PvP axe, just for the purposes of this video to show you the difference. But it's got Opportunist on, which is plus 20% damage against targets with less than 30% health. This can be good, especially on bosses and for clearing out mobs quickly as a bruiser, which actually in mutations isn't a bad thing, but I think I would really rather go for either Rally or potentially looking at that Gambit gem as well. If you are someone that dodges a lot, that can be really useful too. So moving into the skill trees, firstly we're going to look at the Great Axe here, and the abilities that I take from mutations from the Great Axe are Charge, Maelstrom, and Gravity Well. Now, as you can see, the Maelstrom and the Gravity Well are fully upgraded, whereas the Charge is actually just the base ability taken. The reason for that is actually the passives on these trees are really, really good, and you don't want to miss out on those. But additionally, the Charge is more for utility, for repositioning. If you mess up and you get in a bad position in a boss fight, you can get yourself out the way with Charge, which can be super useful and can actually keep you from wiping or from at least going down in one of these timed runs, which is really important. Now, obviously, Maelstrom, you've got, therefore, the capacity of the damage, also enfeebling Maelstrom, so it gives the enemy weaken. With the upgrades, you will see that it gives a bigger pull range, so it drags targets towards a center location, which can help other DPSs and your tank to get a clearer pull or clearer damage spike on the enemies. Absorption, which is where you consume all projectiles while Maelstrom is active. This is great against certain bosses, but also good against archers and things of that ilk, which are shooting projectiles, shamans, that type of thing, where they are firing stuff at you. This can give you a momentary kind of increase to defense as they can't hit you. And the final upgrade there, giving us an extra spin, pulling in foes again and dealing 110% weapon damage. Good for DPS, good for pulling them in again, controlling the mobs in an area, which is going to be crucial as your role as a bruiser, kind of supporting the tank. Now, with the Gravity Well, again, we go for the double upgrade on this one. And of course, by now, most of you will know the Gravity Well pulls foes towards the center in a vortex that will then expand and deal burst damage of 125% when this vortex ends after 3 seconds. With the first upgrade, we get burst damage increased by 10% for each foe caught within. And the final upgrade here, which is allies gain a 10% fortify when standing in your well. This is great for yourself. If you take any other melee DPS, this helps them, and of course your tank. So this is going to be a really good supportive and, again, that survivability type build. It's really going to help out with both of those aspects. Now, in terms of passives then, we'll first look at the Mauler side, as we only take 3 of these, and then the ultimate from this side. So we take the Enduring Strike, which adds grit to your heavy attacks and grants 20% damage reduction during the heavy attack animation. This is really crucial, and it does mean that you can output some serious damage whilst not being able to be interrupted, which is great for a lot of the mobs within these expeditions. Then we take both of the upgrades to the Gravity Well, which is Center of Attention, which is while holding a Great Axe you gain 10% damage when there are 3 or more foes within 4 meters. Generally, as a melee DPS, you're going to be in the mix, and there is a lot of mobs in these rooms, so this is going to be really good. I will admit that this is not necessarily the best thing for a one-on-one boss fight, where it is just you and your party versus the boss, because obviously there's not 3 or more enemies, so you could switch it out for that purpose if you did want to, and we'll move on to options in a moment, but I personally like it for the rest of the content in these expeditions and find it useful. The same goes for this one here, which is Crowded Protection, and this is while holding a Great Axe, you gain 10% damage absorption when 3 or more foes are within 4 meters. Same effect, but boss fights can be less influential. Now, if you did want to swap this out, you could swap it for Mauler's Resolve if you're someone that likes to get a bit of stamina to dodge around. You could also swap this for Revenge, which is when you block an attack with the Great Axe, you gain a 5% damage for 5 seconds, and this can be stacked 3 times, so this can actually be up to 15% damage when you block in attacks, but it doesn't mean you need to block 3 attacks, and with that as well, it's not always active, so that's why I prefer these bottom 2, but like I said, if you are someone that likes to focus more damage on bosses, you might want to swap those 2 out. Moving over to the Reaper side then, like I said, we've just got the base charge ability for that utility. And then in terms of passives, we take Greed, which is where light attacks with the Great Axe give you a stack of 5% damage for 5 seconds. And again, goes up to 3 stacks, which is 15%, which is very similar to the Revenge on that side, but actually is when you're attacking. So as a DPS, I feel this is more valuable. I then look at Death's Embrace, which is increase armor penetration of the Great Axe attacks by 10% against foes below 50% health. This is a really good one on its own, but feeds very nicely into these other ones. So we've firstly got critical gains. When you critical hit with a Great Axe, heal for 10% of the damage done. Really good for sustain. Next one is Frustration. Wherever your attacks are blocked, you gain a stack of 15% damage for 10 seconds, but this is a max of 1 stack. So every time you get blocked, you are able to then re-fight there. Not that often in PvE does that happen, but I just like to have it on there as it is quite useful for when it does happen. You get that little burst of extra damage. You'll also see then I've got Keen Edge, which is critical damage increased by 10%. We've also got Critical Condition, which is Great Axe attacks against foes below 30% health have a 15% increase critical chance, so stacking for 25, plus my Keen Awarenesses that I've got equipped on my armor and jewelry. And then Feed, which is Great Axe attacks against foes below 30% health, heal you for 10% of the damage done, again giving you that big sustained build. Now, on this side, again, it is focused on sustain. You could swap out and take Executioner's Speed if you want to get some haste when hitting 2 or more targets with the Great Axe light attack. But again, this is situational. Sometimes the haste is not necessarily what you need. You need that sustain, so I've gone for things that are going to keep you alive longer. And other than that, on this side, you don't really have a lot of choice for other passives. Now, in terms of the ultimate then, like I said, we do go for the Mauler side, the Mauler's Fury. This one is really good. It's great attacks grant a stacking 3% damage increase for 3 seconds, and this is up to a maximum of 10 stacks, meaning that you can get 30% damage increase. So when you stack this up, particularly in boss fights, this is going to be really, really good. It's going to give you a hugely increased sustained damage, and it is going to help you to clear out these expeditions a lot quicker on the mutated modes. Obviously, Bloodlust is pretty good, 20% move faster and 15% more damage when looking at a foe within 15 meters. But as you'll see, 15% more damage off the rip every time, okay, but once the Mauler's Fury stacks up, you actually get more damage in a short amount of time to allow you to burst these bosses down, so in my opinion is the better choice, but it's entirely up to you. That's just where I lie with this one. Next then, moving on to the Warhammer, here we take the Wrecking Ball, the Shockwave, and the Path of Destiny. All of these abilities are fully upgraded, and we'll also go through the passives, of course, as well. So starting off on the Juggernaut side, we take Wrecking Ball, which is where you strike the ground with your Warhammer, dealing 130% weapon damage and flattening the target. The flattening is really important because it's one of the only CCs in the game where when you do damage to that target, they don't get out of the CC, which with staggers and knockbacks and things, they do. So on a successful hit, you gain a Fortify, granting 20% damage resistance for 7 seconds with the first upgrade, and the second upgrade gives all targets within 1.5 meters the flatten impact as well, which is really useful. This side of the tree, we take the passives Epitome of Bonk, which increases the armor penetration of 10% for all Warhammer light and heavy attacks. Really useful, particularly against some bosses that have the armor bar, but also just against mobs that have armor as well. Also, then we take Exhaustive Attacks, which is all Warhammer abilities apply exhaust, slowing target stamina regeneration by 20% for 5 seconds. This is one that you could swap out, so it is good in PvP and PvE, and like I said, bosses with a stamina bar or an armor bar, this is really great. But for general usage, you could maybe swap it out to quick recovery, which is heavy attacks that hit reduce cooldowns by 7%, so that would be my recommendation. Swap exhaustive for quick recovery if you prefer it. I then take hammer time, which is gaining power on heavy attacks, increasing attack damage by 20% for 4 seconds. Hardened Steel, which adds grits to the heavy attacks, and then Contemption, which increases heavy attack damage by 15% for targets under 30% health, again giving us that good finalizing on kills, getting that high DPS up when we most need it to clear out the mobs efficiently and quickly. Then on the Crowd Crusher side, we take Shockwave with both of the upgrades, giving Weaken to the targets, and of course expanding the Shockwave radius. With this as well, remember we've got Sundering Shockwave on. And then we move over to Path of Destiny. Again, with this one, we've got Leeching Path of Destiny, so we get health back every time we use it. We then upgrade it to give Stagger to all of the enemies that get hit with it, and the ability cooldown reduced for 5% for each enemy hit with Path of Destiny in Mutations. This can be quite a lot of enemies grouped up at once, so you can get this ability back pretty quickly, which gives you a nice amount of sustain. Now, this filters in very nicely with some of the passives from this side as well. Outnumbered increases the damage absorption by 10% if surrounded by 2 or more enemies within 3 meters. Great, again, as a melee DPS. Then we take Guarded Sprint, which reduces damage taken by 10% while sprinting. Again, if you get hit by projectiles mainly, this is great. We also have Concussive Impact, which deals 15% increased damage against targets affected by Warhammer debuffs. Again, all of these give debuffs, so having that on just gives you an extra 15% damage buff when using this, essentially. And then Prevailing Spirit, which is where you regain 35% of damage dealt as health when using a Crowd Crusher ability, which is both your Shockwave and Path of Destiny, and remembering that we've got Leeching Path of Destiny on as well, which combines to make a very unstoppable force. We also then take the ultimate from this side, which is Aftershock, which is wherever a target is affected by crowd control effect, they are slowed by 20% for 4 seconds. Now, this might at first glance seem not that great for PvE. However, the reason I like to take this one is because it stops the bosses or some of the more tankier enemies going a bit rogue and going after your healers or your squishier ranged DPS players, because they are slowed down. It allows them players to kite a lot more, which can be very, very helpful and has actually saved my party multiple times in certain situations. So I actually really like this one, but you could swap it out if you wanted to. The other alternative will require you going Mighty Gravel all the way up to the maximum though, so essentially most players will probably take this Aftershock regardless, but it is very useful in PvE too. Now, on this side of the tree, there is a couple of options that you could take, which is I can do this all day. It reduces the stamina consumption by 30% when blocking. If you do find yourself taking a fair bit of aggro, or you seem to just be getting into the fights a little bit ahead of yourself sometimes, this can be really great if you do a lot of blocking. But for most melee DPS, the reason I don't take that one is because usually I'm just backstabbing and then kiting, so I don't need this as much, so I leave that one out. Acceleration I wouldn't bother with because it's very rare you do light attacks with the hammer. Mostly it's based around doing heavy attack damage. Again, if you want haste, you can take Facilitated Expedition. However, for me, I've found this one to not be quite as useful as some of the others. However, the one that I do quite like is Resurgence. After 2 light attacks with the hammer, debuff durations on the player are reduced by 25%. Now, this one might at first seem not that great, but it can help in certain situations with certain mutated affixes, where you can get rid of your debuffs 25% or a quarter faster, which can be useful. For me, it's not quite as good as some of the other ones, because again, it does require light attacks. And like I said there, mostly this is based off doing heavy attacks with the build as well as the abilities on the hammer. But knowing you've got that ability to reduce those if you do get some of those particularly nasty debuffs, it can be useful. So again, personal preference there as to what you like, but this is my ideal build. So that is going to be pretty much it for today's video, guys. I hope this has helped you out, and hopefully you guys can clear these mutations a lot more successfully and smoothly with this Bruiser build. Any comments, questions, concerns, do drop them in the comments down below, and let me know what abilities you would choose to take. If you take different abilities to me actively, or if you take different passive abilities to me, let me know in the comments why as well, so I can kind of see, maybe tweak my build. If some of you have some good ideas, I can certainly try those out too. But this is my personal best build. Hopefully it does help you out, and that is going to be it for today, guys. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you very shortly on a brand new upload. Take care, guys, and peace.